A United Nations Special Rapporteur, upon the invitation of the government, visits the Philippines to check on the human rights and freedom of expression situation in the country. Irene Khan, the UN Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Opinion and Expression, approved of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s amiable ties with the media. But Khan says the government must do more to undo the effects of former President Rodrigo Duterte's attacks on the media and human rights. Under former President Duterte, several journalists and news organizations were attacked. Congress shut down the largest broadcaster, ABS-CBN.
The current administration appears to be more amiable towards the press than the previous one. However, the damage caused by the previous administration has reduced media pluralism and public trust in independent journalism because of the viral disinformation and troll campaigns. Some changes have been made, but I have also said in my report that it is not enough. I think the government is trying to change the page, and turning the page will require more to be done. The signs are good.
Khan met with around 150 journalists, human rights workers, and members of civil society during her 10-day visit. She also met with the Supreme Court justices, as well as the Executive Secretary of President Marcos. Khan called for an end to the killings of journalists. Under Marcos, 4 journalists have been killed. The Justice Department has already prosecuted the suspects in the 3 cases and is investigating the last one. She called for an end to the state's red tagging of journalists and human rights workers, as it puts these people at risk of attacks and even killings. Red tagging is the act of accusing people or groups of being communists or terrorists. Khan also urged the Philippine government to abolish the controversial National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, or the NTF-ELCAC, which frequently commits red tagging. While Khan says the state has an obligation to protect its citizens from terrorism, it must do so within the limits of its international human rights obligations.
I have asked the government openly whether they have a policy on red tagging, and I was reassured that it does not encourage or endorse it. But there is clear evidence that red tagging and terror tagging are being practiced by security forces as part of their counterterrorism strategy. NTF-ELCAC was established about 6 years ago in a different context. It is outdated. It does not take into account the ongoing prospects for peace negotiations. I therefore recommend that the task force should be abolished.
Human rights groups are elated with Khan's recommendation.
It should be game over for NTF-ELCAC. I mean, since the start, it should have been game over already, because through Executive Order 70, sa ilang taon ng NTF-ELCAC, wala po itong ginawa kung hindi lumabag sa karapatan ng mamamayan.
But the Philippines' National Security Advisor said now is not the right time to disband the task force, and that they are almost winning the war against insurgents, a claim questioned by critics. President Marcos has yet to comment on the issue. The controversial task force against local insurgency was created 6 years ago under the Duterte administration. This is the second time that the United Nations Special Rapporteur proposed its abolition, citing its questionable human rights record. Whether or not the Philippine government follows the recommendation remains to be seen. After all, the UN can recommend all it wants, but at the end of the day, it ultimately rests on the Philippine government to decide on its own. Camila Lamia, C Today, Manila, Philippines.